Hello everybody, I'm Matt Anderson and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way and you can too. I'm delighted to welcome Susan Tucker today to the show. Susan, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to introduce yourself or say a little bit to the listeners.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Tucker and I was raised in Madison, Wisconsin, adopted at age 7 and just really grateful for having the life that I've had. It's been exciting.
Susan, just say a couple of things again for people that obviously haven't heard of you in terms of, I'm interviewing you because I know you've done a great job of amassing wealth, starting from very humble origins. Can you just say a couple of the things that you've done that have been kind of helped you along that way before we sort of dive into the actual interview proper?
Sure. I went from college directly into restaurant management, worked about 70, 80-hour weeks. I didn't realize until just recently, paying off my student loans. I had, my parents had 5 of us, and so they had said, if you're going to go to college and we expect you to go to college, you're going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So we said, okay. And that was a set expectation. I'm really glad that they said that because I knew I was going to go to college, but I would have to work as much as I needed to, and some financial aid and, some type of loans to get through school. And so I worked 3 part-time jobs to get myself through school. And then right out of college, went into the restaurant management, 70, 80 hours a week, and then paid off my student loans within 3 years. And it was $38,000 worth of student loans.
Holy cow. And then professionally, though, your focus has been in 2 areas, is that right? Mostly in real estate investments, but now in the commodities trading, is that right?
Yes, I'm currently in commodities trading. I was in real estate. I will forever be in real estate. Love and have a passion for real estate. Some time ago, I led kind of a seminar group of inspiring people into taking action in real estate. And loved that, but found that there were not as many people who were taking action on it, and realized that there was some other path for me. And really, the message in my life has always been that I've always wanted to help people take action in whatever it is that they're seeking. So whether it's losing weight. Mm-hmm. And especially in that platform, it was all about investing in real estate, because real estate is one of the best vehicles for not only success, but wealth building.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. Yeah. It's funny you say that too, Susan. Now, jumping back to, when I say funny, a couple of things you said a moment ago, because when you said something about you ran this real estate, I think you said seminar course, but educational program to get people to teach them how to invest. And then you made the comment that many didn't follow through on taking action. Well, that's why I'm here right now doing what I'm doing, because, I've coached lots and lots of people. I'm not trying to top your story in terms of numbers, but I've been coaching since 2002. And it's really that building up of frustration of just the volume of people that, paid good money to want to get more out of life and then didn't really follow through. And so it's that, plus realizing that I was just as guilty as everyone else of also not following through often, that prompts me to want to have these interviews with people. So I'll pause it for a second there, because there's many directions we could take, but I want to start out sort of with the getting out of your own way topic. And I sort of had a choice of starter questions, because after that we just can't converse. And it's either what's helped you best in terms of getting out of your own way, or was there a day in your life when you kind of hit a rock bottom and said, okay, enough, and I'm going to from now on move in a positive direction? Because it sounds like you've always been quite a high achiever type, so I'm not sure you've ever kind of had that kind of a day or not. But otherwise, up with the other question, which is sort of just in general, what helps you most in terms of getting out of your own way?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because I would have to say that getting out of my own way and hitting rock bottom, Matt, I've hit that. I probably hit it a couple times. Mm-hmm. I realized I hit it until I was like, really, is this it? And it just continued. And so that was a couple of years ago. So I'll just backtrack a little bit. Mm-hmm. So out of college, 70, 80-hour weeks. And yes, I was extremely ambitious, but I also had, I had kind of a mission, and that was, I'm going to pay off my student loans, and I'm going to learn as much as I can experientially about life. But I was really lucky that I had entrepreneurs around me at that time when I was, managing restaurants. I hated it, actually. So, and I was not a very good student. That's the other thing, because you know what? I always felt like I was somewhat ADD. I wasn't able to focus very well in school. And so the only things that I really enjoyed are, books and or topics that at that time that I enjoyed. So getting right out of college, I had a couple individuals that helped me onto the path of being an entrepreneur. So I would consider myself a multi-entrepreneur. I've owned several different businesses. I've had some, successes. And I don't, looking back on my life, I've just realized, I think my upbringing, the family I was adopted into, they really taught me that I could do anything they could do. Meaning I had 4 older brothers and I was a baby girl, but I was kind of the 5th boy in that they're just going to teach me to be just like the rest of them. So I took, and essentially there was a need to prove as well with my brothers, where they would always say, Susie, you can't do that. You're the youngest and you're a girl. So I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. So I think there was a need to prove in my early life that really drove a motivation, perhaps part of my ambition as an adult, to just say anything they can do, I can do. So nothing ever held me back. There were no limitations in my own mind at that time. Plus, I had my own motivations of paying my student loans back. So I just did it. I didn't realize now, looking back, paying off $38,000 worth of student loans in less than 3 years right out of college was anything exceptional. I just did it because I just wanted, get out of debt. So after that, because of my friend up in Minneapolis who was a real estate investor, he's huge. I mean, he was a multi-millionaire many years ago when I was living in Minneapolis. So he has done extremely well for himself. He was my rollerblading buddy. So anytime I had off, and that wasn't very, often, we would go rollerblading. We'd have a blast. And that's when I could get my son. And I'm a very carefree kind of, spiritual person where I just love my son and just the need for speed. So there's me going around Lake Calhoun as fast as I could. And it was 3.3 miles. So there were often days where, I'd be out there for hours. And I would just love it. So I do have this need for speed. And again, I think that comes from, being raised with 4 older brothers. So I was in motorcycles and driving cars, driving, a 6 shift when I was really, really young. So I think that's part of it also. But getting into the entrepreneurial world, it's really interesting because I've had a couple different platforms where, I was a banker first. So I was in, mortgages. I was helping people with home loans, things of that nature. And one day I realized I did one flip of a property and I was making more money than I was making all year as a banker. So it's a no-brainer. And I just said, okay, hello. Then I'm going to start to do this, full time. So I got rid of being a banker, but that was a wonderful experience for me. Because then I understood, about lending. I understood much more about financial education, all of that background. So it just made sense.
Now, what prompted you to go from restaurant management to banking? I mean, that's kind of an unusual shift for most people.
Yeah. It actually was when my friend Scott said, Susan, get into real estate in some form or fashion. And you know how we do this, where somebody challenges you, and I love challenging people. I know you do too. But I love challenging people today, and it's partially because of what Scott did for me. And I was miserable. I would come home at like 2 o'clock in the morning. He's my rollerblading buddy, but he'd be up and he was literally retired at that age and would just listen to me, kind of moan and complain and cry about how awful it was to manage and babysit, right? So he said, get into real estate, however way you can. But then I immediately said, no, well, what do you mean? Get into real estate? I don't know anything about real estate. I didn't go to school for real estate. I didn't go to school for business. I didn't, we do that, don't we? We limit ourselves by what we judge from what he was saying, I was thinking, no way, there's no way I can get into it. He just really reassured me because his own story is that he worked 70 hours a week as a chef. And the very first time he actually, bought a property in Minneapolis was on a credit card. Now, I wouldn't suggest that. Yeah. And then he flipped it, made some money, and then bought another one. And now he owns half of the bank in Minneapolis. He owns tons of real estate property, including the building that I was living at that time. So it was one of the coolest. And I can't wait to go back to Minneapolis one of these days. And I want to take a picture of all of the things that he has created for himself. But Matt, I was so lucky. And I don't really even realize how lucky I am. But I've had... it's almost like people have come into my life, and it was like God bringing them into my life to show me the possibilities of life experiences. So I have this friend who's, my rollerblading buddy, and right at that time, assisting me and helping me, encouraging me to get into real estate, something he knows has led to huge amounts, massive wealth for himself, to a point, Matt, where the building that we were living in, I don't think I've ever told you this in all the years that I've known you, but we had a leopard lounge, we had a tiki room, we had a 50s style diner, and he spent millions and millions of dollars not only on collectibles on the walls, because he was an eccentric dude, but then all of the things that were themed, so theme rooms.
So this guy, Scott, then you met him managing restaurants because he was one of the chefs. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh, okay.
He was actually the landlord of the building that I lived in.
Okay.
And one of my roommates, what he did was he knocked down 8 apartments, knocked down all the walls between them so that they're all in one kind of, one housing unit, I guess you could call it. Right. So he had 8 female, we were all professional executive women. It was really interesting. And one of my best friends actually I met from that area up in Minneapolis.
So Susan, one of the things I'm going to throw out here, based on my experience of knowing you, and this isn't perhaps a question you're necessarily expecting, but I guess I think it's interesting. I think the people listening will find it interesting, and I hope you do too. You've used the word lucky on 2 or 3 occasions, and on one level, I'm curious for you to define that. However, I would argue, again, I suppose this is totally anecdotal, but I mean, I've known you probably, I'm guessing it's at least 15 years now. When I first met you, when you were in banking, you exuded an energy that most other people didn't. And so what I'm trying to say here is I think you actually used the word, you said something about I've attracted these people into my life or something. And I think that's exactly, I think, what you've done. So on one level, I would argue that's not an accident, because I think, people are, magnetized by certain types of people and their personalities, but also the positive energy they exude. So again, it's not that I'm trying to disagree with you. I'm simply pointing that out, that I think it's not all an accident or luck. But the interesting thing, I'm curious, where does that come from for you? Because, I mean, you've always been that way ever since I've known you, and that's never really changed. I mean, is that something you were just always innately as a little girl, or again, can you talk about that? And partly from a practical perspective, so people listening, I mean, we all, there's that whole notion of you attract into your life people that are sort of getting your energy vibes. So on one level, it's almost for people listening, what are some things they might want to think about that could raise their own energy vibes so that they can, be more attractive, and that's the wrong word, but can magnetize more of the types of people they want, so they can elevate who they spend time with, which is going to raise their game and help them be more successful and effective.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, right out of college, I think I dove right into personal development. So here's going back to childhood. I did not have an easy childhood. However, I knew I was given an opportunity to change my life. So we'll go into the trauma, 0 to 7 trauma. But then once I was adopted, it was a whole nother, here's a whole nother opportunity, a whole nother chance, and I knew it. To make something of myself. So I knew, even as a little girl, when I was 7 years old, I wasn't going to blow it. I was going to take every opportunity to listen, to learn, and since I was really little, I think I really had this understanding that I was very different. So first of all, I didn't look like my adoptive family. So I knew that from the get-go. And I think that story, in a way, has led me onto a path of attempting to find my uniqueness. So when you say my energy, I don't even see it because I certainly have my days and I certainly have had my years, humbling times and recreating myself. I've had to recreate myself numerous times. So looking back really on my life, I think the personal development was a huge piece of why I am the way I am. And it was because I was seeking inspiration. So there's who says it? I think it's Tony Robbins who says, there are two places when people make changes, and that's either out of inspiration and or out of desperation. And for me, I've definitely made some changes out of desperation, but I definitely, over the course of my life, have made changes. And I used to think this way because way back, when I was changing opportunities or jobs, I would always say, okay, here's your fork in the road. And that is, you have an opportunity to either grow and make a change, or what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, you might hate it. And if you do hate it, then there's an opportunity you could always go back, right? So it's really interesting, but I never went back. Every change I would make, it was always for the better. So then I'd go, and I learned from that experience. And then there would be another opportunity to grow and make a change. And I would make another change and I'd say, okay, like you said last time, if it's not for the better, Susan, you can always go backwards and go back. I never went back, Matt.
When you talk about that, the first thing that pops into my head is that I assume, and I think this is people's fear sometimes, they fear that if they make too many changes, that they're going to have to leave people behind who aren't going to, come along with them or be as supportive or encouraging or want them to be the same old fill in the blank your name. Have you had that experience when you said you've made changes for the better? So have you had to sort of leave people behind that weren't just as on the same path as you?
I have, Matt. And you know what? I used to really have trouble with this. And this was some time ago when I was making so many changes. But I realized, you know what? I'm so grateful because I'll be honest, the last, I would say 15 years, I've made so many changes, but for the better. And what I mean by that is, and I'll go into this later as we go into, further on your show, but I've been burned so many times. And that is where I was going to tell you the number of times, and yet I won't play victim to it. And most people who really know me, they'll I tell people, hey, you know what? I've been burned 1.6 million times. I mean, dollars worth. And that is absolutely the truth. But have I learned something from every single one of those experiences? Absolutely. And it's from that I'll be able to gain my lessons, my insight, the wisdom to be able to move forward and perhaps not to do that again. But see, some of the people that I'm surrounding myself with now, they're like, oh yeah. So I'll tell them the story of 1.6. They're like, 1.6? Try 50 million. Like, what? And so some of the people that I am surrounded by, and I'll tell you how I got here, is really interesting. I'm like, oh, so it's really not that big of a deal. So I need to stop worrying about that and not worry, period, but look forward and move forward into the visions that I have always seen for myself. So, there was a period of time, though, it took me a long time, Matt, and I would still say there are times where the past does show up and does hold me back some, in that there is that fear of the past showing up again, but it doesn't have to, because the past does not equal your future, right?
So let me stop you for a second. You gave a brilliant example of your 1.6 now, talking to other people and they're saying, oh, that's nothing. My loss was 50 million.
Yeah.
But the first thing that pops into my mind is the number of people that I feel like I've, run across over the years. And I've probably been guilty of this myself, certainly for periods of time where, they have an emotionally scarring experience and they don't bounce back. Like that then ends up sort of scripting the rest of their life because it was emotionally painful, whatever that was, whether it was a financial loss or, I mean, every human on the planet's made, foolish financial mistakes, but it could have been a relationship experience or a bad health experience or whatever it might be. So what do you see as the difference when you're talking to people in that world of, where they've made, as yourself, that's made such an enormous decision? I mean, you could have been crippled emotionally by that and given up your dreams and become sour to the world. So what is it that you see in people who don't, that gets them to get up again and keep moving forward?
Gosh, that's a really interesting question, because I've often pondered that question. But again, it would go back to, I think, inspiration. And that was what I was seeking early on in my life, knowing how, traumatized I was in the past. And so I was always seeking for other stories, other people who, and even at that time, back in college, I never would have actually talked about trauma, because I didn't even know, truthfully, that I was traumatized, because I was disengaged, or there's that association of what's happened in my past. I just kept wanting to move forward. So what qualities? I'm not sure, Matt, but I can honestly say that I've had not only the financial setbacks, but relationship issues. I mean, terribly abusive relationships. So not good there either. And so really I've had setbacks in probably all realms. And I think for the very first time in my entire life, I've been given myself, permission, but my fiance also has challenged me in the biggest way, and that is to face your biggest fears, Susan. So, and I would be, and this is weird, Matt, because I would consider myself throughout most of my life as being kind of a fearless person. But now at this point in my life and facing my biggest fears, I can honestly tell you there's a lot there that I never acknowledged, and it's all because it's in my subconscious mind. So it's everything that's driven me to this point in my life. And now I realize if I don't face my biggest fears, I'm not going to be able to step up into the person I'm meant to be, to help as many people as I'd like. I've always been driven by helping people. But I have learned with wisdom and through trials and tribulations how to help people better, if that makes sense. So there is a difference between helping somebody to enabling, right? Weakening someone, and to helping someone to their strengths and strengthening someone. So there's a big difference. There's a very big distinction between helping someone to their weakness and or to their strengths.
What prompts you to bring that up in this context? That's please.
Because I've struggled with. Okay, so my motivation and my drive, because I think that was something I figured you would ask is so what is it that drives you?
Sure.
And it's helping people. But I have learned through trials and tribulations with where I've enabled people, and it's it did not help them.
Right.
I've even helped, partners. So here's a prime example. So if I have a partner, say in real estate, which I've had several, and in my past, so guess what, Matt? Because they lacked thinking they were going to be successful, but because I thought I was going to be successful, you know what? I'm going to just go do it. So let's go do a property. Let's go flip a property. And whatever money we make, I would write out a check to these partners for half of it, and and if they didn't do what it took to give 50%, I just accepted that, Matt. So I had to get right with myself to go, why, Susan, are you doing most of the work and carrying your partners? And I actually had a business mentor, coach that I still speak to, good friend of mine now, and I'm so thankful. He challenged me where he would just say, why are you enabling, and why are you, carrying your partners? So I had to learn all of these behaviors in myself, okay, by putting myself into situations where I was either taken advantage of or abused, and not seeing it for what it really was, Matt. There's other people who probably saw it, but I didn't. And I see it with others, right? So I can challenge others now and go, what is it in you that makes you why are you putting yourself in a situation where you're being taken advantage of? I do it all the time. And as a coach, I've had quite a few individuals that I have coached who've been sexually abused. And you know what? That is one consistency. It's putting themselves. So what they have done is they recreated and re-perpetuated abuse in their adult lives through various means, whether it's in business, whether it's, personal relationships, or even friendships, right? So these are all consistent messages that I've had to learn, I think, the hard way. And I always say to people, Susan has had to learn through the school of hard knocks. You've heard that, right? I am definitely one of those people. And it might be because, maybe I'm so stubborn that that's the only way I learn. So
there's two ways I want to go in this conversation. I think it would be wise, because there's things I want to pick up on what you were just talking about, but I think it's wise for sure by now, or at this point, because you've alluded to various things, we'd picked as a topic focus for this conversation, going from trauma and toxicity to learning to trust. And as three theme topics, certainly within the greater realm. I mean, I've always been awed at your ability to magnetize money and be so successful in business. And what you're, I think, helping today with it obviously is painting kind of a holistic picture on the the good, the bad, and the ugly, I suppose, to different parts of that. But I think it would be wise to just say a little bit more about. So you came to the States at 7. So just talk about, or at least inform the audience, because they don't know anything about your background. So where you're from, what was the early part of your earlier years, and then move into the toxicity piece. Just since it's highlighted in the topic, we ought to kind of give it some airtime.
Okay, so kind of a stream of consciousness. My parents wanted a little girl, and that's how I became a part of the Tucker family at age 7. So really a high-risk child to be adopted, just so you know.
Yeah.
And for most of your listeners. Adoption is definitely, that's an interesting conversation we could probably have just by itself. I'd love to write a book about it. So in the future, but, I know I was given, and I feel like it was God giving me another opportunity. So 0 to 7, I was adopted from South Korea. My parents had died when I was young. My grandfather gave me up for adoption. But while I was living, and I found this out just recently, because, like I said, this is the first time in my entire life I'm willing to go back to my early childhood, because since I landed in America, Matt, I've been running, and I've been running I don't want to look behind me. I want to just continue to move forward.
Yeah.
I don't want to look behind me because of what might be there. Well, I finally get to a point in my adult life when I have been forced to. It's been a challenge, one. I have been challenged to look back, but it's partially because I also feel like the person that I'm meant to be cannot be until I actually face my biggest fears. And the biggest fears was looking back on everything that I then stuck into a box and I repressed and said, no, none of this happened. And I'm going to act as if none of it happened. And I'm going to run, and I'm going to run so fast. But Matt, what I didn't realize is that trauma, fight or flight, the PTSD, for somebody who's been traumatized, and I'm learning the difference between a person who has not been traumatized versus a person who has been traumatized. People who have been traumatized put themselves into that PTSD state or fight or flight very often because it's a comfortable state because of the trauma from early childhood. So when a normal person, when I say normal, I don't mean that I'm abnormal, so it's not a negative, but what I'm saying is a traumatized mind versus a non-traumatized mind. There are two completely different behaviors. And so for me, that drive plus the fight or flight, the two together, there was a period of time, Matt, I don't even know, looking back on my life, like, why did I run multiple businesses, have all these partnerships, run the group of real estate community, right? And how many, so that plate, spin a plate, and then as you're spinning that first plate, you've got to spin the second plate, and then you got the third one. So I would literally say back at a time that I don't ever want to go back to would be 8 to 9 plates, Matt. So business endeavor. So when you were saying, Susan, there was a time where you were making, and there was, but I would never want to go back to that place because it was very inauthentic. Running from a place of need to prove, helping everybody to almost my demise. So that's where I put myself into a state of fight or flight, and into experiences of being totally taken advantage of. I mean, I've got one guy who I lent private money to, who's sitting in Dane County Jail as we speak right now, who owes me a lot of money. And I'm not going to get my restitution check from him this year because he's sitting in jail and not able to make that money back. So there's, I've had to look at all of that and go, could all of the situations I put myself in as an adult, could it be attached to the early childhood trauma? And sure enough, Matt, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely, to a T. And of course, as I'm helping coaching a lot of other people who've also had sexual abuse, I see the same consistent situations. Putting themselves into situations where they're taken advantage of, and they don't even see it until you have to literally point it out to them. And there were some people in my life who would point things out, and I would say, oh, no, they're not like that, and then I would have to learn the hard way. So it's the fight or flight. That is huge. And that I would say that's probably a huge piece of my life that I've had to really own and face and confront and deal with and heal from. And the healing process is going to be probably until the day I die, but I'm glad that I'm facing it now, versus taking it with me to my grave. I know there are a lot of people, especially in our history, and I think this is where I'm being called perhaps to, Susan, face your healing, get healed, and help as many other people, because Matt, I'm telling you, if I went through my entire life without actually embracing my trauma and repressing it and shoving it into a box and saying it never happened, it has dictated and it has created the things that have been created in my life. Not all of it bad, but a lot of it where, I have only me to point to say, hey, you're the constant in all those situations. So I can't play victim to it, and I never will. Have I played victim to it? Sure, I've wallowed. It's a horrible feeling. It's a horrible feeling when you're betrayed or taken advantage of, or, that's a lot of money that I worked really, really hard for. Now, I have optimism for my future, and I know that those were all my trials and lessons, and all the tribulations that I had to get through in order for me to live my life full out at the level that I'm supposed to, not in fight or flight, with a really good harmony in my life, right? In order for me to then help the people that I truly, truly want to help. And those are going to be individuals who cannot help themselves.
One thing I'm really curious about is how you blend the two, and so this is how I'm segmenting it. So I'm being very conventional here, and I apologize. It's not that I really want to be. So here's my train of thought. As you're talking, I'm thinking, firstly, I'm feeling immensely impressed, impressed and proud that you're saying what you're saying and you're talking about it, because I feel like it still doesn't get in much acknowledgement and airtime. And then my next thought is to myself is, how come And then I think of all the self-help books and those sections in the bookstores in particular, how they, I mean, I can't hardly think of, I mean, I've got dozens of books behind me, hundreds of books, and I can't think of hardly any, if any, that really talk much about trauma. And, then I think about one of the people I already interviewed for my podcast who also experienced sexual trauma as a child and talked about, 40 million people just in the USA that have been impacted by sexual trauma. So, that's just, obviously one country. So then I'm thinking, well, this makes no sense. And so where I'm going with this is then I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm sure there's another section in the bookshop. This is how my narrow world that where there's ways to help people address trauma. Obviously, there's other ways to do it too, of course, but it just seems like they're separate. And given how much personal development you've done, because earlier you used the expression, it's been a huge piece for you. You've definitely found a way to blend or combine or see the benefits of both. I want you to talk about that because there are so many people out there that need both, I think, or benefit from both. And then as you also allude to, there's so much either self-denial, self-deceit, or just lack of awareness where people maybe have had some really bad experiences and have just blocked it all up. So I want you to talk about some of the things, in other words, more, I suppose, almost practical strategies or things that people can do in both camps to not just to heal a little bit, but also to grow and really empower others.
Absolutely. So here is where I know part of the reason why trauma is not brought about very often by those that have been traumatized. And part of it, Matt, is shame. There's a deep, deep level, and I know we all as human beings face shame, but sexual abuse, there's a level of shame. It's like, sorry if I get a little emotional, but it's like taking who you are as a human being and tearing you up into about 1 million pieces. And for the rest of your life on your journey, you're piecing together all those 1 million pieces because that's how you feel, shattered. I didn't realize this because, like I said, I drove so hard from my conscious mind where I just said, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to do everything that I possibly can. And it was not until just really recently in the last few years that I realized that the subconscious mind actually drives our life far more than our conscious mind. So, looking back on my life, I'm like, wow, I did get to a couple places in my life, and that tells me, how maybe tough my will is or strong, my drive was. But the biggest piece of it, Matt, the reason people don't bring it up is because there is such a deep level of shame, like nothing else, that prevents people from wanting to speak out, that prevents people, and it definitely has for me, to a point where, you know what, Matt, we've scheduled this twice. I almost attempted to get away from this because people who've been traumatized, they isolate.
Right.
They don't want to be in the spotlight. They don't. And I know getting out of your comfort zone, that's why I finally said, okay, Matt, I'm ready. I'll do the best I can, but I'm going to be real because that's just the raw place and the space I've been in. This is just very recent, facing early childhood trauma. And so I've got a long ways to go, but I also feel I am so grateful for the space I'm in. And when you say I've attracted wonderful people, you're right. I have attracted amazing people in my life. But I also will say, my mom, when I was very young, would always say to me, you seem like you always are finding all the broken people, Susan. So I would always find the kids on the playground, that were being bullied. And of course I was bullied, but they would be bullied, and I would not worry about my own bullying, or being bullied, and I would go after the children who were bullied and console them, make them feel better, and just say, it's okay, it's okay. So I think early on in my lifetime, I gravitated to helping people out of love and compassion and empathy. So I was always a very sensitive person. But because I was adopted and didn't necessarily fit into my adoptive family, I think I had even a deeper level of compassion for those that were hurting, And I can say that the majority of my life, I would say I have found the path of healing without even knowing what I was healing from. So that's why I was going for inspiration. I was going for the inspiration because I knew it must have been deep down that I knew I was, coming through a lot in my lifetime. And so these other inspirational stories of all these people who have come from poverty, or people who've come through dire straits and, have overcome so many obstacles in their life, those stories always gave me so much energy, so much motivation, so much inspiration to continue, my own life path. But it has only been within the last, like I said, recently, Matt, I can talk about, the levels of self-sabotage within my success too, that I've hit certain thresholds, and I know exactly when I hit it, at 50,000 a year, 100,000 a year. And then there was a threshold, and it's the biggest one yet so far, and that's been about $250,000 or a little bit more than that. There was 3 years where I made, $1 million, and then it was like, whoop, that's your limit. And I remember thinking about this and going, who are you? And here's our limiting minds and how our minds speak to us. Who are you, Susan Tucker, to outshine your adoptive family? You're making way more money than anybody else is. And who are you to do this? And so, bam, just like that, sabotage in the moment. And I'm still working from that place. And every single time I've hit a plateau, I've had to work on my limiting beliefs and the levels of success and what I believe for me. But I also have always had visions of helping people, and that has always been my drive. And what I mean by that, Matt, is my humanitarian projects. I've had, literally for the last 20 years, I've had visions that I've always been writing about. And I still hope to see it come to fruition. So we'll see as the next couple of years.
So Susan, thank you for sharing all this. It's really moving and powerful, and I truly hope lots of people get to hear this, because as you say, this hearing from other real people gives us courage to step up and do more and be more, and somebody has to lead. And so, I commend you for doing that. You've talked a couple times about the subconscious mind, and then just now you said, I've had to work on my limiting beliefs. And it sounds like, well, in my language, kind of visualizing or picturing other, what was the word you used? Just visions of helping people has been part of that. But I want you to talk more about that, because I'm quite sure there are people listening, and I won't even lie, I'm one of them. When you start talking about those income thresholds, they're so common. They impact almost everybody. And most people don't get past them, or they might get past one or two, but they certainly don't get, go from 50,000 to 1 million and more. Can you talk about the kinds of things that you've done that have helped you accept those things, not self-sabotage, address, what have you done to get past some limiting beliefs?
Okay, so there's a great book. Actually, there's tons of books. Can I just name some?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so T. Harv Eker, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. That was a powerful one at about $100,000, a year limit for me. And then I had to go back to my blueprints. And oftentimes what people don't understand is if you are raised by caretakers, oftentimes your parents, okay, you're going to have the same beliefs because they've transferred them to you. So they're not your own beliefs. They're beliefs from your caretakers.
Mm-hmm.
So as you start to see this, and like I said, when I realized, oh my gosh, I hit a $250,000 a year threshold, and I went, whoa. And I realized then I, chose to sabotage because I was thinking I didn't deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Because who are you to be raised in this family, and you're outshining this family who's taking care of you. So that is really interesting for me. And yet today I can say, well, you know what though? I'm the only entrepreneur. I'm the only one who really did choose to take a very different path.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's something that was right for me. And looking back on it, all the sacrifices, the discipline, the persistence, I wouldn't take any of it back. Just the learning, the experiences, the people I've met, the people who have helped me, but then for me to help others, has been an incredible journey.
So Susan, just to dig deeper, you talk about T. Harv Eker's book. I'm fairly familiar with it. I mean, I read it when it came out. It was a long time ago now. But you talk about, I think he talks about those money blueprints. In other words, that we learn typically the attitudes towards money that, as you said, our caretakers have, our parents had. So in other words, but you clearly surpassed that. So how did you do that? In other words, were there one or two specific mindsets in the book that you, chose to believe more or shifted your thinking on?
I don't know if it was so much the book. I mean, that's a good space for learning about your own blueprint. I think what shifted me and what I came to realize is it's okay, Susan, to want to think that you want to be at a level of influence, right? So I had to get right about money. So I hear a lot of people. So here's a couple ways, Matt, if I could share with you ways to sabotage your success.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the first one, and I see it all the time. I see it play out politically. I see it, in almost everywhere, it seems. And that is being jealous of somebody else's success. I see it all the time. And so the minute that somebody, and I'm asking your listeners to have a conversation with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that is anytime they look at somebody else who is a billionaire or a multimillionaire and have this insecurity or jealousy towards that person's success,
mm-hmm.
you can surely bet you've thrown out some negative energy to literally resist the energy that could attract for you your own levels of success. It literally is a repelling energy. And I share that partially because I've had other friends of mine that I've had to go through who've had, some type of jealousy towards me, and I could never figure it out because I don't have that tendency with others. I think, oh my gosh, this life is so hard as it is,
mm-hmm.
with all the trials and tribulations. Why would you do something as silly as be jealous of somebody else's success? I mean, they've had, if anything, I look at people who have been successful and I'm like, oh, tell me, what's your secret? Let me learn from you. It's that collaboration. It's that circulation of energy. I'm always like, gosh, what was it? What was it like? And so I'm always about learning vicariously through others.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. And I would love to surround myself, and I have. I've decided to make that a lesson of discernment for me, that if there are people who are more successful, they're the people I want to surround myself with. Now, they have to be of good character. I mean, and honor and ethics and integrity, all those good things. But those are the only people I will surround myself with, Matt, because you know what? The people who lack that were my lessons in the financial abuses, that I went through. So I've learned a journey of discernment, and that is to be very selective. The Association, or the Law of Association, by Napoleon Hill. So there's another powerful book, Laws of Success. There's a couple different versions, but about 1,200 pages is the longest one. And I studied that book, I tell you, back in 2000, when was it, 2010? Like a textbook.
And that's Napoleon Hill?
Napoleon Hill.
Wow.
Laws of Success. He's written so many books, but this particular one is really thick, and it's just so powerful. There's another one just recently I'm rereading, actually with my fiance, And that's Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Oh, is that powerful also. And it describes in detail why people are successful versus the people who are not successful.
Is there one thing that you want to share from the Laws of Success that still stuck out with you, even though you read it 9 years ago?
But here's one. Mastermind. Mastermind, and this is what I have with Kurt, and this is what I have with a lot of my friends, and definitely with all my partnerships. So here's how lucky I am, or I shouldn't really use lucky. I'm fortunate, and I'm so grateful. But I have attracted some really powerful individuals in my life. But so going back to my real estate days, Matt, I was at a platform where I was making money in real estate, and I was selling, real estate education in this group of, individuals. And just because you have good knowledge and you have good information, you have good education, it doesn't mean anything. Even knowledge is power, but it's not powerful until you actually apply it.
Right.
And most people don't realize in order to apply it, you have to take actions. So when there were people who would come to me after like a year or two and say, okay, I would say, awesome, you've got the education, go do it. But then they'd go, okay, another 6 months would go by. They haven't done anything. And it started to make me feel bad because I was making money and there were other people who are not taking action. So therefore not taking action, you're not going to get any new results, right? Mm-hmm. It's like to lose weight. You're not going to lose weight if you do the exact same thing. That's the definition of insanity. So I felt guilty that I was making money, and I just said, you know what, I can't be around talkers. And that was yet another huge lesson in my life, and that was surround yourself with doers. Do not surround yourself with talkers. The more people who talk, but if you really think about it, Matt, think about life, right? Everyone talks. Mm-hmm. Everybody I know talks. Mm-hmm. Who are the individuals that I really respect are going to be the ones who actually speak very little. And that's where I almost didn't want, and there are times where I feel uncomfortable even speaking about my successes because it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to sound haughty, but I've had to come to, a point in my life where I've had to say, but Susan, you do have some things that, ought to be shared with others. And I don't call them secrets. It's just the way that I have overcome, I guess, my lessons. But being around a whole bunch of talkers, Matt, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Hang on one second. I just want to jump back a second here because you said there were two common obstacles. One was being insecure of somebody else's success. Is the second one the obstacle as in, okay, so and the second one is that surrounding yourself with talkers, or was that?
Oh, no. So don't surround yourself with talkers. Right. Surround yourself with doers.
So that's the other common obstacle is surrounding yourself with talkers.
Yes.
Right. And so then you mentioned the Mastermind group. So how have you applied that? Actually,
I'm actually still seeking a mastermind group, by the way. I'm really seeking a mastermind group, and I finally realized it doesn't have to be locally because a lot of my contacts are international. So as long as people have a like-minded, like I said, integrity, honesty, ethics, all of the good stuff. But a mastermind, so the Laws of Success by Napoleon Hill, okay, there's a whole chapter on mastermind, Matt, and it's powerful. And who you surround yourself with. So Edison and Ford became the super giants that they did back in their day because they were friends. So they were actually utilizing, I would say, the chemistry of each other's brains. Mm-hmm. And therefore, so it's like one person here's their mind, here's the second person's mind, but then you create this third mind. Mm-hmm. And that's what's referred to as the mastermind. Napoleon Hill talks about it a lot. And you are not going to harmonize with everyone. So if there's a negative person, and I've trust me, I've had this also. If there's a negative person, and you attempt to harmonize, it's not going to work.
Right.
This is partially, yes, where I'm seeking harmonious blending of the chemistry of my mind with other individuals. And as I have done that, it's powerful, the exponential growth, not only in your business, but then alliances to do and to fulfill some of the visions that you have in the projects that you've got. So my visions have become so much bigger once I became very discerning and very selective about the people in my association. Very selective. Now, you asked a question earlier about, so Susan, do you feel bad? There was a time I did feel bad, Matt, because I felt like I was leaving them, or I was, but I look at it a little differently now, and I think, you know what? They could do the work also. Mm-hmm. They could choose to grow. So there's either, you either grow or you die.
Here's a tricky one that hopefully doesn't touch you too much personally, but for people listening, because I know these people exist, for people that are in an intimate relationship that's probably on the, I don't know, I don't necessarily say toxic, but where the other partner isn't supportive enough for that person to really grow. I'm more drawing on your life experience where you've seen that. But what kinds of scenarios are there? In other words, is there, for people that are determined to grow, are the scenarios where inevitably just the couple parts because the words aren't coming to me at the moment, but where it's so obvious that there's just not enough compatibility that they separate, or have you seen other scenarios where someone just had to step up and take the courage to say, this isn't nurturing who I want to be as a person anymore, and I need to move on? Because this is one of the more meaty obstacles that some people have that might be, obviously it takes up a significant chunk of their life.
Yes, I do, Matt, and I can speak from personal experience. I actually was, and again, I think it has a lot to do with the trauma and why I attracted this person, or I should say, persons. But I think it has a lot to do with, in an intimate relationship, it has everything to do with respect and communication. And so if you can't ask for what you want, which I was not able to in my past, but therefore then I put up with, a lot of abuse. Emotional, mental, verbal abuse. It was awful. But again, that I attribute to my own trauma and putting up with probably way more than I ever should. And to a point where I've learned now, and that is I don't allow people to disrespect me anymore. I did in my past, but I think that's where people have to stand up for themselves. And if they don't, it most likely, not maybe in every case, but it most likely might be because they were traumatized and they don't know better. So, the message I'd like to maybe leave with listeners is if you feel you're being taken advantage of, or in situations where you feel somebody disrespects you, I just wonder if they're not sticking up for themselves. And that I would hope that they can do some inner work, because there's a lot that has come to me even in the last year and 2 years, finally being in a relationship where he absolutely respects me and wants to challenge me to be the best person that I am. But I'll step up into that, but then I do the same for him. And I don't know, Matt, if there are people who will embrace change within themselves. I think change for some people is not easy. So if you're a person of growth, I really would encourage people to make sure you're with somebody who's going to grow with you and to support and respect you. Don't stay in a relationship when somebody's going to cut you down, criticize you, or flat out make fun of you, or criticize you. That's horrible. That's abuse, and you can say no to that. And I am. And thankfully, because this is so many years later, but I'm in, the happiest space because I'm with somebody I can grow with. He challenges me daily. I challenge him. That's where the mastermind comes into play. And it's so pivotal to success of your business, to your relationship, to families, to the, ripples from you.
That's fantastic. I know we need to wrap up here, Susan. So I've got 3 final questions. So the first one is, I guess, who have you become since your most challenged times?
Oh boy, I would hope a better person. It's been heavy, Matt. I can honestly say some of the heaviest moments. But I feel like the light is at the end of the tunnel. And what keeps me going is knowing I'm going to be able to help people more than I thought by not speaking up, if that makes sense. Because I didn't want to.
What's that?
I said because I didn't want to at first, because it's not easy. There's that level of shame.
Well, the world really, really needs people like you to be speaking up more and more, because and just shift the imbalance so that more people can live the lives of who they really want to be. So this is powerful. What's a good first step for people?
First step in, you mean accepting their trauma, or?
And having the courage to be more of who they want to be in life.
Gosh, to get out of conformity, to stop worrying about what other people think, to accept your vulnerability. See, I used to think, Matt, to be vulnerable and to share my inner stuff, I used to think really was weak. Like, who wants to hear my stuff? And I now realize it's those that share their inner stuff and their hardest work that you can actually connect to, And so asking people to really embrace their vulnerability or their inner voice. And it took me a while to get there. But it's a journey, and I realize it's a long journey. But I do remember as often as I can, I remember to stay in gratitude. And if my mind goes to kind of a darker place, I pull myself out by writing in my journal, a list of all the things I'm grateful for. And I have so many things. So a gratitude list, I think is so important when your mind goes to a, tough or dark place, to lift yourself out and to remember why you're on this journey and how really beautiful it can be.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. And then lastly, how can listeners keep in touch with you?
Oh boy, that's a tough question, Matt, because I have not really had much of a presence. I'm only on LinkedIn right now.
Well, that's a good start.
Otherwise, my SusanTucker.com, I am looking for an incredible website designer, because SusanTucker.com, I've had it forever. I've had it since, I think, 2004, and I've never actually created a website. But the coaching and the books eventually I'd like to write. There's some up here. I just have to do it. So not talk about it, just do it, right?
Well, this would be a great place to mention one. Like, what would be a first one that you'd like to work on?
There was a question that you had earlier, and that is how to increase your energy. There's absolutely ways. Yes, so that would be my first one. The second one would be about adoption. Probably third or fourth one would be about trauma, because that still is out there. I still have more healing to do. Yeah. As I go through healing with my trauma expert. She's a specialist in that field. So there's a lot of growth there. But yeah, I've got several books in my mind. I just have to find the time to do it. So I'm looking forward to the next couple of years.
Oh, hopefully we can revisit this too for listeners as well, to talk more about your journey. So Susan, this has been humbling, inspiring. It excites me a lot for the future, because I just think the world's shifting in terms of who it wants as leaders. Certainly, hopefully after the next presidential election in this country, anyway. But regardless, I just feel like it's an inevitable shift, and in a way, I feel like you'd be kind of perfectly positioned to be one of those people. And I think now it's okay. I think people are more understanding that there is no perfect person, and that we're all on a journey. And in fact, it's often how I wrap up here to say, please don't put anyone on a pedestal. I'm talking to you as listeners now, and say, we can all start somewhere. We've all, we're not trying to be perfect in all areas, but Susan has mentioned numerous specific things that could all make a difference to getting the ball rolling for yourself. And I'll reshare some of those on the show notes, which you can find at matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. Otherwise, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. Leave a review. And otherwise, Susan, so many thanks. Can't wait to hear what you do next.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Stepping up into your greatness and doing this. This is so exciting for you.
Thank you very much. It is, and it's I think you've touched a lot of people with this podcast, and with that, I'll sign off with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.